All right, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's KAMIND webinar, CMMC Level 1 Do-It-Yourself Kit. My name is Mike Klass, and I'm a CMMC registered practitioner here at KAMIND IT. As a reminder, we'll be having one Microsoft webinar, second Thursday, and one CMMC webinar, fourth Thursday of each month to keep you up to date on what's going on. So if you have any ideas for future topics, please let me know. Before we get rolling today, a couple housekeeping items. There will be time for Q&A at the end. So if you can keep your microphone on mute, that'd be greatly appreciated. With many of us working from home, we'd like to eliminate all background distraction noises. And if you have any questions mid-presentation, please feel free to use the chat functionality or the raise hand icon, and we'll be sure to weave your questions into the presentation best we can. And this is important. We will be recording today's webinar. So if you're uncomfortable with this, now would be your opportunity to opt out. With that out of the way, let's get down to business. So most people, you got to learn to crawl before you walk. Then you got to learn to walk before you run. What most people would call building steps. CMMC is just like that. You have to accomplish CMMC level 1 before you can tackle level 2 and then level 3. Hopefully on today's webinar, you will learn why DoD contractors need CMMC certification, an inexpensive way to cover your CMMC level 1 needs, how KAMIND's do-it-yourself CMMC level 1 kit works, and how to further engage with us when you get to level 2 and you need level 2 help, otherwise known as NIST 800-171. So please sit back, relax, and let's hear President and CEO Matt Katzer talk to us today about CMMC Level 1 Do-It-Yourself Kit. Please take it away, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Mike, and welcome everyone. And yeah, today's discussion is about, if you look at it, it's about how to get started. And that's kind of the biggest problem that we all face. It's like, okay, what's a policy? What's a procedure? What's a process? What types of things do you want to actually have in the assessment? So what we done at KAMIND, we're part of the CCP on in terms of the assessor program. So we're on the list for going through our CCP certification, and also will be part members of some assessment teams. And so what we've decided to do is we're looking across our customers and our clients and trying to figure out, okay, what makes sense for everyone and how do you actually get started? And everything comes down to, I was thinking about talking to our team and everything else and clients, and we came up with this idea. We started this a while ago, a DIY starter kit, and where you have some of the fundamental pieces that you actually need for level 1. And level 1 is, if you look in the CMC specification, is a foundational. I mean, if you get right down to it, we all should be doing level 1 in all our businesses anyway, because like everyone says, you should probably have multi-factor authentication deployed on everything. You probably should have your systems encrypted. You probably should have your, spam filters and everything in place. And you should probably be doing those necessary things to make sure you're auditing the things, make sure stuff works the way it should. I mean, this is really foundational when you actually look at it. And so, but when you think about trying to get started, everybody thinks there's a heavy lift, and there really isn't a heavy lift with level 1 under the new specifications. So we put this kit together and give you an idea of basically what it is. So those who don't know that KAMIND, basically we're a cloud-first company. And it's kind of unique because everything that we do inside the business and everything else, it's basically structured to basically be cloud solutions. Like in our case for our CMC level 2 enclaves, we actually have a separate enclave in GCC High. And so our business itself runs in CMC level 1, and then we have an enclave for CMC level 2 to actually handle and address those needs. And that's how we handle our clients. And we're also one of the unique partners in Microsoft, one of the select few that can actually provide you with the GCC High subscriptions. And it's really, as you look these pieces and everything else that we have, it really is kind of fascinating to see how things have changed and as the market has changed. And our sole purpose that we exist is really rolls down to one thing. is we exist to prevent and solve big problems. Now, some of this that we're going to have is you've probably seen some of the material before. There's one really key slide that I would really like to kind of talk about that people always have. And, you know, if you go back, this came out from DoD in 2019, and really the foundational of CMMC, when you look at what it really is, we always used to put cybersecurity as this building block on the side. And what happened was we would tag it on to something else and come different solutions and everything else they have. What's really fundamentally changed, and we're seeing this across the Microsoft ecosystem, is really that cybersecurity is core. And like in terms of the planning committees I'm involved with Microsoft, for instance, we had some discussions on back in 2020 on the Microsoft Business Premium. And we actually have lobbied hard to basically put in place the high-level subscription, the high-level antivirus XDR component that's used in a high-level E5 subscription as part of that fundamental small business. Because Microsoft believes, as we do as well, cybersecurity is core to whatever you're building. So as you look at environments and you put the pieces together, you want to see how the pieces are actually integrated. And that's really key. So when you looked at trying to putting together the DIY kit in terms with our compliance folks and our technical folks, we basically made some fundamental decisions, like it's built around Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 security. And the reasons for that are really practical reasons, because Microsoft is in the process, because they have federal tenants, they're getting their 365 E5 and their Microsoft 365 E5 subscriptions actually validated to do the necessary level in terms of level 2 and level 3. So you want to take advantage of those capabilities. But there's a lot of pieces and a lot of misconceptions. And it really comes down to the questions we're always asked all the time is, which level do I need to be at? Do I need to be at level 1, level 2, level 3? Well, this is done by your contract. If you work for a prime, your prime's going to specify what type of requirements you're going to have, and they're going to tell you need to be at level 1 or you're going to have to be at level 2. And those that in level 2 knows that if you have level 2, that means you have CUI, you have controlled and classified information. Now, the NIST specification, in terms of how that actually set, it actually crosses over the whole all levels. But when we actually look at what we're trying to do in a level 1, we're really just trying to do 6 basic controls. Now, those that want to get more information on this, I know this is a little bit of repeat, just kind of, you go to the acquisition site, the acq.os.mil, where you want to get the information associated with the industrial base. That's where the documents, that's the base documents that we all are using. Now, when DoD kind of went through and changed the process of what we wanted to, level between who's on level 1, who's on level 2, level 3, they basically came up with this new distribution so that at level 1, you can actually go through a self-attestment. So you basically say, hey, I implement policy and procedures and everything else necessary. So I got all the baselines put in place. So that's what the whole purpose when we looked at the DIY kit, we wanted to put it in place and basically make sure you got that building block. Now in your business, you're going to look and say, okay, do I need to be level 2? And they want to be able to build on it. So what we're doing in terms of providing, in terms of DIY kit, structured in such a way that it actually gives you those backbone, those pieces, so you can actually take them, put the bases in place and use it as a mechanism to go to the next stage, level 2, if you're required to actually do it. Now, the DoD, this is just a reminder, they have not changed the dates. The dates still are what they have here in the diagram. Everything's going to go live on terms of as we go October 1st of 2025. And we also have the same situation is they're going to come out with the new contracts. There's going to be new contracts that are going to have requirements put in place. And that's going to come effective in terms of this time next year. And there's supposed to be a interim ruling that's going to come out this month, but it's almost over. So we'll see what happens if something happens on the Friday before the holiday weekend. And if it does, then we'll have the new dates and a new schedule put in place. But DoD will do what DoD does. So the questions we're always asked is, what is your CMC deployment strategy? Well, when I look through in terms of how we want to actually deploy it and how you want to look at it, this is probably a really good slide that you have from the CMC Accreditation Board. And you look at the pieces that you actually have in terms of what is level 2, which is the NIST 800, and what they took in terms of foundation is basically 17 practices or 6 controls out of that NIST 800 and 171 specification. And you can do that self-assessment. And then and the one change that they're actually having, even though it shows that you can do a self-attestation for level 2, DOD in one of the recent town halls in February basically said that's not going to be the case. So it's really, you can do it from a short term, but there's going to be some new rules on that. Now, I put some other slides in here, just kind of give you an idea of what the overlap is, so you understand in terms of how DFAR fits in terms of the subparts C through G and what this really means, and how it fits in the CMMC. Now, if you're running for a level 1, a lot of this stuff is saying, okay, I'll do the necessary pieces that I need to do to be level 1. I can do those in the commercial tenant. But if I have requirements that have CUI, I'm going to have to be on GCC high. And we've seen a lot of questions that were asked in terms of, well, geez, I want to be able to do Google Government Cloud or something like that. The problem you run into when you actually look at these subparts C through G, there's requirements that information is turned over into the federal government. And in terms of what Microsoft does in GCC High, they have agreed to actually do that. That's why they're able to actually have CUI, where some of the other cloud providers have not agreed to do that. It's actually in their operating rules and procedures. Now, the other aspect that you have to look at when you look at this whole thing, you have the shared responsibility model. And this is things that we do, that you're supposed to do, things that the cloud provider does. And when we look at the policy and procedures in the DIY kit, we take these into consideration to make sure you have the right pieces. That's why we base the DIY kit on using the Microsoft 365 E5. So you have a fundamental baseline. Now you can actually go modify the scripts and change them how you want to, how it makes sense for your particular implementation, but that's how the design is put in place. And when you look in terms of how this actually maps into NIST, for instance, this is the very pieces of the responsibility in terms of what Microsoft does and what we have to do as organizations supporting clients that are in terms of doing CMC activity, but also in terms of the clients themselves. Now, I took a map in terms, there's been a lot of questions on the, in terms of which type of tenant do I need to do for what? And what I did is I kind of mapped, what level 1 and level 2 is and make it really clear. So when you took in terms of level 1, you can all do this in the commercial tenant. There's no requirement. I mean, basically you can handle that. That has all the level 1 requirements in it. But as soon as you take and crack open that door for CUI, you need to be in GCC high. And as a lot of the reason comes down to is how data is being stored, but also how information is being managed. Because in the GCC, in the enterprise tenants in GCC High, those are even, they're Microsoft-owned data centers, but they're actually Microsoft, in a lot of cases, will contract that management out to 100% U.S. citizens that have been qualified to using that, because those data centers handle the different type of security requirements that the national government has. So there's a lot of issues associated with it when you actually look at what you can do and what you cannot do. And when you actually map this in terms of what you want to do, in terms of how we actually look in terms of like the CMC do-it-yourself kit, your starter kit, it really is you're building the foundation. And a lot of this stuff you can do yourself. And, the hardest part, when you look at anything, it's like you have a big project ahead and everything else. I mean, what's the hardest part of a big project? And it's really just getting started. And that's what the whole purpose of the Getting Started DIY kit is. It's basically allowing you to get the pieces in place so you can actually build the methodologies and those processes and procedures that you need to put in place to be successful and grow your business. Now, as you look in terms of you want to actually walk up to the, you want to go to level 2, then you start getting implementation. So technical implementations start probably for a very small business around 10K, and they go up from there, very significant depending on what you actually deploy. So you have large organizations can easily spend, 6 and 7 digit number on deployment. And large organizations be like 2,000 or 3,000 people. So when you start looking at how you want to actually do it, you have to have a strategy associated with it. And one of the things, for instance, at the end, we have a concept that we've been really using with Microsoft Azure Virtual Desktop, so you can actually build enclaves in GCC High. And we have a white paper. If you give feedback, we'll provide you with a white paper on it. But what we want to focus on, we really focus on this piece here, the foundational piece. And to get in mind, when you look at, there's a tool that we actually use is one of the tools we have, the Microsoft 365, because KAMIND is on the Microsoft Acceleration Committee for CMMC with Microsoft. And we use the placemat. Well, if you look at the placemat, so there's 110 controls. What happened, we have all these domains associated with it. The blue items are what you have to do for level 1. So it's very straightforward in terms of the pieces, but it's like anything else, it's trying to get started. So when you actually look at the level 1 and when you look and trying the mapping the data and collecting the data, you have to actually really decide how you are actually planning transition. Most people, when they do level 1, they're saying, okay, may have some issues associated with level 2. I may want to actually put the necessary pieces in place. So when we actually looked at the starter kit, we looked at it saying that let's go find a SaaS tool that you can actually use to put the information together in the level 1. So you actually build the foundation so you can actually get the necessary methodologies in place to go to a level 2 or a level 1 plus as thing changes. Because keep in mind, as this is run by the DoD, and this level CMMC is a fluid specification. They were constantly going to be adding new pieces into it. So you're going to have to start, pick a level, and basically go through and start putting the necessary pieces in it. Even ourselves internally, like we use the level 1 for the general business areas and level 2 in terms of our enclave. A lot of the features we actually put in place using the Microsoft 365 E5 in the commercial tenant have a lot of the level 2 features built into it because that's how we actually secure our environments. And I'd strongly recommend you start looking at it from that aspect as well. But this is really trying to say, okay, what is the minimum you actually need? So when we actually use a tool like FutureFeed, for instance, FutureFeed, we actually load up all those artifacts, load up all those policy and procedures. So we actually design it. So in some ways, what we're actually doing is looking at our implementation of level 1, putting those together as a proven methodologies to put in place. So you actually can get into this model where you're 100% green on your deployment. You have all the necessary pieces in place to meet those level 1 certification. Now, there are going to be some new rulings out here. You notice this has a current score count. So on level 2, it's a 110. It starts off at 205. CMC level 1 has a similar score they're going to be announcing as well. So once you get the basis done, then you go look and say, okay, what we did for ourselves in our enclaves, for instance, is we said, okay, what does level 2 look like? So we took our level 1 implementation and said, okay, this is all the things we need to do on a 365 E5. And we took our level 1 implementation, say, how does it map over into a level 2 environment? So you get an idea of how the process changed and what you need to look at. And these are the things that you want to consider. And it's really important that when we look at the DIY kit, for instance, is we really structured it in such a way that we wanted to basically put it into a model that's based on a 365 E5. You want to make sure you get a tool. You can use FutureFeed, Comply Up, or the Microsoft Compliance Manager. We're use FutureFeed for this. And the reason is simple, is that we're trying to get a single point where the single point of truth, as they say, where information is put in place and we can have audit assessors go access the information and kind of validate the environments. And, there's other pieces you need to do, but the big question you have is, am I going to be level 1, level 2? But regardless if you're going to go level 2, you're going to have to start at level 1. That's just the way the things work, and as you put the pieces in place. So if you look at saying just you need level 1, and that's what we looked at in terms of the, in terms of the DIY kit, we said that, okay, let's just look at it from the standpoint. The basic level of cybersecurity, what really does it need? Well, you have 6 domains, and you have the number of practices associated with those to basically put those in place. And that's really what the focus is in terms of a level 1. And when we looked at trying to put the DIY kit in place, we wanted to try to make that you have the foundational pieces in there. So you have the getting started pieces in there. You have the templates, and you have the necessary resources in terms of the key resources, like using the technical reference guide that you come across that we're using the CMMC placemat. And when we did a lot of the work in terms of what we're doing ourselves and how to actually make this available to you, and when we actually put together, because that being part of the CMC team, we actually had a lot of input in terms of the technical reference guide for CMMC. So you can actually go through and say, oh, I want to look at these controls and how I want to do the technical implementation. Well, we have the technical reference guide associated with it that gives you the necessary guidelines and instructions on how you put pieces together. What you're missing on top of this is you're missing the policy framework, the procedure framework. Now, in terms of level 1, there's not a requirement that you have to use future feed, you have to have formal policy and procedures, but most people, as they look in the environment, level 1 is a stepping stone. So you want to basically put those things in place because this is fundamental cybersecurity. And it's really becoming more and more apparent that as you go forward with going for your cyber liability insurance and everything else, you're going to have to put MFA on everything. You're going to have DLP on everything, data loss prevention. You're going to have to go through and make sure everything has multi-factor authentication on it. Make sure that basically the hard drives are encrypted. You protect personal information. All those things that you're trying to look in terms of what CMC Foundational has is what you have to do. And from a defensive standpoint, you want to be in a position that as a business, you want to say that I'm implementing towards this standard or plus on top of that. That's from a strategy to basically protect the business. Now you look in terms of what a policy looks like, it's looking like the domain access control for level 1, what you have to have. And basically, and that's what we took an approach on it. So in our implementation of these things to actually get the pieces on it, it's really going through and deploying what the E3, E5 security is, or the MS365 E5, Microsoft Intune, using Autopilot, conditional access to do the necessary forcing the necessary multi-factor authentication and the DLP policies. So when we actually put the policies in place, we looked at our own implementation. What we actually put together is that for access control policies, we have the policies put in place basically in terms of as guides. These are PDF guides because you all know that you don't want to copy these things directly. You want to basically be able to take and look at them as reference and put the pieces in your own policies and adapt them as you see fit. Now, of course, we're going to try to help with this as much we can. So like in our access control policy, we have tables in the front, for instance, what in terms of what procedures that you would put in place for, like, in this case, you'll see some additional procedures that we stuck in here in terms of, what's the MAM policy put in place? What is the policy for onboarding employees? What's the Windows Information Protection policy? And reference those, because those policies are actually required as you go implement the various strategies. You're trying to figure out how to actually get all those things in place. So we actually went through and took access controls and put it down and basically said, okay, this is what you need to do. And we're exposing some of the things that we use in terms of internally, how we actually got in terms of achieving level 1 and getting those pieces on how we're building our level 2 enclaves. So we want to make sure those things are available. Now, where Future Feed comes into is Future Feed gives you this ability to basically go through and score this whole information of what you're doing. So, and that's why when we look at the DIY kit, we said, okay, we're going to pick and use Future Feed as your SaaS tool and actually provide you some consulting time from a compliance standpoint to make sure you get the right pieces in place. Because, what is the hardest part for any project you start is just getting started. So we just wanted to make sure that you get started as fast as you can. And this is all foundation and key to it. So what's really the next step on this stuff? And it's really very simple. When I go back to this earlier diagram we gave early that I showed you earlier. It's all about trying to get this foundational piece in place. And in terms of when we talk the DIY kit, it really is this piece right here. Now, as you go through and do level 2, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you actually need to do, because you're going to have to go through and get a C3PO certification from a third-party assessor. But you want to make sure you have the pieces in that. And that's why we're going through expenses for KAMIND, for instance. We're on the CCP, on the CCP committee that's actually going through to basically go for accreditation for ourselves. And so we can do certification. Not that we're going to come through as a C3PO, because we're more of a licensed provider providing GCC high and consulting. But it's basically to make sure that we have the foundation skills and experience necessary with this. And this is all new stuff. KAMIND was one of the first people that attended the CCCP training classes that happened in January. And we're lined up as soon as the exams are released, and this should be sometime later this year, we'll be one of the first people to go through the certification process. These are the things you do, and they were taking this information, putting it together, because our core philosophy is that we want to help businesses grow and help be successful and solve your problems. Now, looking for information on what you need to do, there's going back to the ACQ, the mill site, there's a self-assessment scope guide. Scope guides are kind of interesting. And as level 1, it's not such a big issue in scope because you don't have CUI, but level 2 it is. And as well, when you actually go through and you look at, in terms of when you go through an assessment scope and look in the assessment guide, you have to look at the various pieces on it. So if you haven't looked at those documents, make sure you get a hold of them look at the mill site and then take a look at them and see the pieces go. But the DIY kit, as I said, is really just focused on trying to do this one piece. And it's foundational. And you use this piece to actually build your level 2. And that's the secret. So in order to actually get to like the level 2 standard, which is where a lot of businesses want to go, well, you may end up being a sub on a contract, for instance, and they may actually demand that you go level 2, and you say, well, geez, I don't have CUI in my environment. I don't need to do this. But you can actually start saying that, okay, what is the strategy? So if you use our DIY kit, the foundational model that we put in place, you actually get the point that you build this model and the process and procedures you need to go. You have put the methodologies in place in terms of the data collection tool that comes with the kit, and you have increase your ability to actually meet these needs in here and can drive down your costs. Because I said, implementation cost is very expensive as you go into trying to figure out scope and gap. That's why we build a CMC enclave for level 2. We're trying ourselves, we're a small business, we're trying to drive down our costs as well. So as you look in terms of level 2, you're going to have to go through and look at the assessment scope and trying to figure out the pieces. You're going to have to look in terms of your 365 subscriptions and see how they're actually put in place. Like if you're in terms of what's in the commercial tenant, which can be level 1, and what's in the GCC high tenant, which is level 2. So you get an environment, and this is very similar to what ours looks like. You run into a cloud separation environment where this is a level 1, CMMC level 1, and this is a level 2 environment that's a reduced enclave. And you start looking at, so when I actually go through a third-party assessor, you've done certain things. You basically come through and said, I put a set of policies and standards implement across the organization. And I've also have reduced down in terms of where CUI is based. And I structured in such a way that I can actually control the costs, so my assessment cost is lower. And that's really the key pieces of it. And then the stuff you get into after that is looking at the gap assessment. And this is a slide we used many times before. When you actually look in terms of level 1, you have to go through this model. And what is the best way to actually go through this model is really to look at it from a standpoint, put the foundational pieces in place and grow from those foundational pieces. So like when you look at cases like when you deploy like an AC, like active, whatever you do for AC for the access control, authorized access controls level 1, you already have the DIY kit. We'll give you the policy and procedures for those, so you have the basis already built for your level 2 implementation. And that's kind of key because all the stuff is incremental. When you look at in terms of level 1, NIST 800-171 encompasses what level 1 does and level 2. And so the questions we ask is how to move forward. And that's really why we did the starter kit. And it's really trying to get that foundational piece in place, getting those foundational domains, get the policy and procedures. And yeah, even though technically you're self-attesting, you don't need to have written policy and procedures, but you want to put that mannerism, put that capabilities in place. That's what the DIY starter kit is all about. And it's structured to give you, make sure you get this piece in there, and it's basic. And we, excuse me, and we structured it in such a way that it's foundational, it's easy to do, and it's affordable, and it gets those things in place, because the hard part is this level 2 if you have to go make that assessment. But unless you have some of the fundamental in place, it's not going to happen. You know, and we have the information in terms of how to get some of this stuff from the Microsoft, our future feed, for instance. And also we use a lot of Edwards in terms of some of the training resources, but a lot of this is built on building the fundamental pieces on it. So that's really the secret of the DIY kit. Upcoming webinars that we have, and the key thing is Cloud PC. Why is Cloud PC really important? If you're going to build an enclave for CMC level 2, you're going to do a Cloud PC or an AVD. So it's very crucial to basically understand how that technology fits in. If you go and look from a standpoint of, you know, what you're trying on the CMC, we have another follow-on meeting with Mark Berman, for instance, talking about future feed in terms of how the DIY kit is actually working with this and how you can actually take your business to the next level and build that methodology in it. And this is really key. So what's the next steps on this? It's really straightforward. You got to move your licenses, company that can handle GCC high. So if you're going to go into commercial or going to level 2, find that resource that can handle both. And we're a direct Microsoft partner. We can easily handle this for you. And you're going to start your journey and start it right now with our DIY kit. And you can book a 15-minute call with one of our registered consultants. And for the first 5 people to pre-order, and the kit only has a 3-month future feed subscription. We're actually going to include a 12-month future feed subscription. So in essence, you have it for a full year, and you'll be able to actually look at this and actually do your journey and see how the pieces grow so you can get to the next level. So call Mike Bazia at 503-726-5933 so we can get you started. But most important, if you don't know what an enclave is or have any idea how you're going to use an enclave, go put your feedback information in on our website, on our feedback form, and we'll give you a copy of that free CMC enclave white paper. With that, I'll pass it over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Matt. Nice job. So at this point, we'd like to, open it up either via chat, or if you unmute yourself, please feel free to speak up and ask any questions you have. And I'm actually going to start the group off with a question. Watching this presentation today, it made me think of this, and I wanted to ask because I think the group will benefit. So Matt, I want to save money. I want to do the CMMC 1 level stuff myself, but I know my contract that I hold with Department of Defense is going to require me to be at a level 2. So when I buy my Microsoft licenses, do I buy the commercial 365 to start off to do the level 1 work, or do I start with the GCC high licenses?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. This is where you have to strategically look at your licenses, because when Microsoft increase NCE, there's new license term that are monthly, yearly, or triennial or 3-year license term. And there are different prices associated for each license type. GCC high is in a different Microsoft data center. A commercial tenant and a GCC high tenant are basically physically in different buildings. And that means also they're physically different tenants. So you can't take one licenses and transfer over. So that comes down to strategies. And this is why you start looking at Enclave, because you're going to say that, okay, I know, let's say I have an organization with 100, I'll just pick 100 people into it. And I know that 80 of them are going to be commercial, but only 20 of them are going to be in GCC high. So what you may do is actually, work with us and you buy 80 of them on the lower discounted licenses, which are the 1 year, annual or the 3-year triannual. The other 20 you leave on month to month. You build out a GCC high tenant, purchase licenses for that, and then you basically cancel the subscription at the end of the month term, and you move them over, and that's how you actually manage it. And the secret of this is that you want to do enclaves, because if you look at the organization and say, I'll just put all the users on GCC high and I'll buy it at MS365 E5, well, it's an enterprise volume license agreement. It's 1 year and it renews every year. And the price of a 365 E5 is over $1,000 paid up front. So you're talking $100,000 expense. So when you look at a design, that's why we look at the DIY kit. You want to look at your organization and say, okay, where do I control information and who needs to have it, so I can actually keep the expenses in the organization down, and that's the strategy.
All right, thank you. Good answer. All right, so who else has a question? Again, if you don't want to unmute, feel free to ask away in the chat session. Either way.
And when we put together the policy and procedures for this, we really put them together from a standpoint of how to basically make sure that what policies you implement, that you have the same policies that we use as we go through our assessments, and we're making those available with notes and everything else so that you can do customization of them.
So one thing you all might not have, I think a lot of you have seen the CMMC placemat that Microsoft's put out before. There's a version 2.0 we can get you. But I don't think a lot of you have seen the Microsoft Technical Reference Guide for CMMC 2.0. So if you need that, just email us, call us, let us know. We'd be more than happy to get that out to you. Looks like we have a question coming in here. Or maybe a comment.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you look at the history of, the CMMC and everything else, especially with everything going on in the world. And even from our standpoint of just trying to control security, we all have a responsibility to make sure that we protect the information and basically our clients' information that we deal with. And in terms of how we handle things and everything else, and make sure that we maintain. And when you look at CMMC, to us, it's just another security standard that we actually have to implement, but a very important one that gives us this baseline that we all can measure against. And that's kind of crucial for any business nowadays. And if you've seen some of the insurance requirements that we're seeing for cyber liability insurance, you have to deploy MFA on everything. Like we just went through some upgrades on our Fortinet firewalls, for instance, and under the new Fortinet Firewall 7.2, firewalls now support MFA. And it's really kind of interesting to see how things are changing.
So we actually got one comment here. We're starting to see some cybersecurity insurance companies not provide coverage unless they're MFA enabled. And yeah, definitely, we're seeing the same thing.
And what you're also, okay, I can jump in, Mike, what you're also seeing is that when you actually do a claim, they're going to come back and go to you and say, okay, let's see your proof that you've implemented MFA on everything. Let's see your evidence that you actually have done it. So all these things that you would do for CMC, the provide that you're doing maturity, providing proof, and providing evidence for an assessor, is what we're seeing in the commercial sector being required to actually do, so your claims are not denied.
I've been dealing with a couple insurance companies for the last year, and I heard them both say the same thing. They paid way too many claims in 2021. So yes, they're tightening the rules and making sure you're MFA enabled and just have good cybersecurity hygiene.
Yeah, and there's some organizations, for instance, that we run across that haven't upgraded to just upgraded 2016, but haven't enabled the Azure Active Directory identity to Office 365, so they can use the Azure MFA prompting and everything else to control on their basically the administrator accounts on their different devices that they have and servers. And in some cases, since you may not have Windows Hello or biometrics on it, but you can get like a hold of FIDO keys, like a YubiKey, for instance, which are fingerprints or single passcode keys, and use those to actually log into the servers. Those are the things that you're going to have to do. Those are the things you're going to have to do in terms of CMMC. Those are the same processes and things you're going to have to go through in your environment. And when you talk about MFA, like the message in here that that one of Brad has posted, is that you got to look at all your switches, got to look at your infrastructure. Everything has to be there. And if you can't support MFA, you're going to have to fall back on some standard like the NIST 853 standard about password ability and what the length of passwords are. Because everything you do have to be defensible, unless you're otherwise you're going to get those claims denied when you actually something bad does happen.
Yep. Thanks for the question, Brad. Any other questions? Again, chat window's open, and if you want to unmute, feel free to ask away. All right, all quiet, going once, going twice. Anyways, we really appreciate your time today. Hopefully we'll see you on next month's CMMC webinar. And don't forget about our June 9th Cloud PC. If you have interest in Cloud PC or Azure Virtual Desktop, that could be a good webinar for you to attend. Anyways.
Yeah. And don't forget also to, excuse me interrupting, to basically go to our feedback page and get a copy of our Enclave white paper. If you don't know what an Enclave is or how it's going to help you, this is really going to be the key thing to how you're actually going to maneuver in this environment.
Good reminder. All right. Well, again, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks for attending, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thanks a lot. I found that very useful. Okay, you guys have a good day.
Thank you.